This week's Parsha is Parshas Shemos. And we are Be'ezus Hashem holding at the second shir of Parshas Shemos, Perek Beis, Pasuk Aleph. So Parshas Shemos, and really Sefer Shemos, begins with the story of the Exodus. The story of the Yidden who were Avadim Lepare b'Mitzrayim, and Biyad Chazaka, and with Nisim and Aflois, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, brought us to Har Sinai, gave us the Torah, made us the chosen nation, and ultimately took us into Eretz Yisrael, where we were able to fulfill the purpose of creation. Now, the very, very beginning of Parshas Shemos, Perek Aleph, sets the stage for what's to come, and that is the Yidden were living in Mitzrayim. The history of the Yidden living in Mitzrayim traces itself back to Parshas Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, Vayechi. When Yosef was sold to Potiphar, there was a hunger. The hunger got so bad that the sons of Yaakov were forced to come to Mitzrayim, encounter with Yosef, and ultimately Yaakov and the Shivim Nefesh settled in Mitzrayim. Immediately, the Torah shifts and talks about how, although once upon a time the Yidden had it pretty good in Mitzrayim, but Vayakam Melech Chadash al Mitzrayim, Asher lo yada es Yosef, and he imposed different taxes and different cruel and unusual gzeiros, albeit cunningly, like we talked about in the previous year, on the Yidden, and it got to the point of vayemoru as chayeyem ba'avoda kasha, and it was very, very difficult to the Jews. Perek Beis in Sefer Shemos, this next year, is going to set up, really, the next critical building block, pun intended, for the story of the Exodus, for the story of Sefer Shemos, and that is by introducing us to Moshe Rabbeinu. So really, if you think about it, and you just look at the poetic nature of Parshas Shemos, we're setting the stage. Part one of setting the stage is the Shibud of Mitzrayim. Part two of setting the stage is introducing us to Moshe Rabbeinu, and as we'll see Be'ezus Hashem in the third shir, the Shibud Mitzrayim and Moshe Rabbeinu are going to converge, and that's when Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I've chosen you to be the one, to be the leader, to orchestrate and oversee the Geula, to be the one that's going to take the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. So really, Perek Beis of Sefer Shemos is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, and I think it's kedai to give it a little bit of an introduction, then we'll go through the Psukim, and then Be'ezus Hashem, when we're finished going through the Psukim, we'll talk a little bit more about Moshe Rabbeinu. The Pasuk, in the very, very end of the Torah, it's the third to last Pasuk in Sefer Devarim, says, V'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe, asher yidai Hashem panim al panim. There were many Nevi'im in Klal Yisrael. The Gemara says in a place, Kiflayim ki yotzei Mitzrayim, 1.2 million. But v'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe. There never was and there never will be a Navi that was on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is part of the Divrei Hesped, the eulogy that the Torah gives Moshe Rabbeinu at the very, very end of the Torah. The Ran, in his Drashas Haran, and this is in his Drush Shlishi, in his third drasha, he asks a very basic, fundamental question. Outside first. How could the Torah say, V'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe? We know one of the foundations of our faith, it's one of the Yud Gimel Ani Mamins, is that a person has bechira. Every person has free will. Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz miyir shamayim. So yes, person has mazel, and it's predetermined before a person even comes to this world. Is a person going to be a gibar? Is it going to be a chacham? Is it going to be an usher? There's certain aspects of a person's life that are predetermined. Of course, in mazel Yisrael, we can change it. But at the same time, there's certain elements of a person's life that are predetermined. But hakol bidei shamayim, Chazal say, chutz miyir shamayim. Every person has free will to decide. Is he going to be a tzaddik? Is he going to be a rasha? Ubacharta b'chaim. But we could do whatever it is we want to do. So, Freik the Ran, how could the Torah say, like, "Come navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe"? What will be if a person in some future generation, exercising his free will achieve a level where he's mamish like Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe even greater? Wouldn't he then be zoicha to nevuah that would be as much, if not greater than, Moshe Rabbeinu. So, Frek the Ran, how could the Torah say, "V'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe"? And to answer this kasha, the Ran says what I believe is a davar nifla ad lamoy. I think it's kedai to read a few sentences inside. Says the Ran, Ki ain't safek, there's no doubt in my mind, she'inyan Moshe u'madrei gasai ha'yelamayla min hateva. That the idea, the inyan, and the madrega Moshe Rabbeinu was lamayla min hateva. V'sheheshlimay Hashem yizbarech be'inyan nisi. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu completed him in a miraculous way. But ma'she'ein b'koyach ha'adam v'yicholtei lahasik. And he got him to a point where it's impossible for a person to reach without this kind of divine assistance. Ka'amroi, like the pasuk says, "V'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe." In this pasuk, Haidiyanu, the Torah is being Maidias. Shenavuas Moshe olav Hashalom, umadrei gasoi, hila maila me'ateva, einenu efshari sheyasigenu ha'adam kifi minagativi. It's not a madrega that a person can come to al piderech hateva. She'im hayukein, because if the madrega Moshe Rabbeinu was something that man could achieve, heich amar, how could the Torah say, v'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe, v'Hashem yisparach lo yimna toiv mi ba'olav, l'vilti yasig the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was never going to withhold a person from being able to achieve the madrega that he wants to achieve. So what's the Torah saying? That if a person is steiging and he's coming to the point where he's about to reach Moshe Rabbeinu, all of a sudden HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to come give him a frask and he's going to come crumbling down. Hashem would never do that. So how could the Torah say, like, come Navi oid bi Yisrael k'Moshe? Aval inyan ha'pasuk hu lo idea. Ki inyan Moshe hoya mikat hanisim v'haniflois. The inyan of Moshe Rabbeinu is in the category of miracles. And it's something that's outside the realm of what we consider nature, of what we consider teva. And then the Ran goes on to explain Nevuas Moshe and why it is that the Nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu is something that's chutz miderech hateva. I'm skipping a little bit. He wraps it up and he says, V'zehu shoydiyanu akasav. This is what the pasuk is coming to teach us. Ki zeh davar nisi. Chitshay Hashem Yisparach v'hiskivoy bekoichoy ki yeser haneflois shechidesh lekiyum haTorah. And the reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this miracle or performed this miracle known as Moshe, it's like the other miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed, so that there should be a kiyum haTorah, so that the Torah should be able to exist in this world. Ki hu hechreichi shebekulam. In fact, says the Ran, from all the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed, so that there should be kiyum haTorah, this was the most critical one. This was the most crucial. So like this, there would be no Navi in the future that would be able to come and lie and say that he's saying Nevuah that's fakert from Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu notified us. We're in that pasuk tucked away. In the end of his Zoysa Bracha, Shamasha Hisig Moshe, who Lamayla min ha'avsharas. That the Madrega Moshe Rabbeinu was something that's Lamayla min ha'avsharas. B'derech ha'pela. V'shazeh ha'pela la'ye'asa la'adam acher ba'olam k'Moshe nasa la'Moshe. Imkain. And if that's the case, Neida b'zeh. We know for a fact, Shekol Misha Yachlik Olav, any person that's chaylik with Moshe, who mechazik. Ki Moshe higia le'madrega shalayagia adam eileha la'olam. He goes on and on and on. But the beautiful poetry and the Yesod Gadol that the Ran lays out here in his drushes, and that is that the Inyan of Moshe Rabbeinu was a nes. We're going to learn the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to see so many elements of it. Most of it we already know, but to appreciate that really the Madrega Moshe Rabbeinu is not a Madrega that a person can come to. His Madrega is a Madrega of Nisi. It's from the Nisim v'neflois that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu have made this miracle of Moshe? It was something that was necessary, l'kiyum haTorah. Just like there were other miracles that were put into place, l'kiyum haTorah. See the Ramban and then the Parshas Boy. We know all this. Ma'amed Har Sinai, Kriyas Yamsuf, but says the Ran, from all the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created and performed for Kiyum HaTorah, this was the most essential one. Because at the end of the day, our emunah is so much predicated on Nevuas Moshe. And it's for that reason Moshe Rabbeinu had to be someone that was beyond reproach. Someone where it's impossible to go ahead and argue against. In fact, Chazal say, V'gam b'cho yaminu lo'olam. And that's rooted in the idea that Nevuas Moshe is ba'ifin nisi, it's ba'ifin paloi. Where do you see it in the Torah? V'loikam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe. You see those words, says the Ran, what what should come to mind is this Yesod that I'm telling you over here in the Drush HaShlishi. And the truth is, when you think about, again, I'm not going through this now, this is Be'ezer Hashem going to be part and parcel of the Avodah of Sefer Shemos, really through Sefer Devarim. But Moshe Rabbeinu was Kibul Torah Misinai. Moshe Rabbeinu went to Shamayim several times, and he was made on himself. Lechem le'ochalti, umayim lo'ishnasisi. Moshe Rabbeinu is the only person who was able to communicate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at will. In fact, Rashi says in Parshas Baloischa, Ashrei Yelud Isha. Wow, a Yelud Isha, a human being is able to achieve the madrega that whenever he wants to dial HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes his calls. It's an incredible madrega. Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was Basbaklaria Hamira. The Rambam in Perek Zayin Hilchas Yisodei HaTorah, based on Psukei HaTorah, and then the Parshas Baloischa. He goes into great detail in a very nuanced way, where he distinguishes between the Madregas Hanavu of Shara Nevi'im versus the Madregas Hanavu of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah refers to as Isha Elikim. The Medrash says in the beginning of Parshas V'zayis HaBracha, Michetzia Ulamaylo, he was Elikim. Michetzia Ulamata, he was an Ish. Pnei Moshe was Kipnei Achama. When Moshe Rabbeinu was born, Nismala Habayis Kulei Oira. All these inyanim, which are so far above our pay grade, start making a little bit of sense when you understand this Ran. It's true. There's no way for a person to achieve this madrega. These were miracles. The inyan of Moshe, the cheftza of Moshe Rabbeinu was a cheftza of miracle. Truth is, in the world of Kabbalah, Moshe Rabbeinu is neshama, was made up of all the neshamis of every single yid. The Zohar Kodesh says more than once, is pashtuse hu b'chol dara v'dara, b'chol tzadik v'chacham, the mesasik b'iraisa at shitin riboy. Klai was made up of 600,000 neshamas. Moshe Rabbeinu had a neshama hakoleles, where the 600,000 neshamas that make up Klal Yisrael were branches, so to speak, of his tree, of his Elon, that was his grace and neshama. In fact, the Zohar Kodesh says that Chazal say in the beginning of Parshas Shemos that Shisha were born bekeres echad, that vayirbu, vayishritzu, vayarbu, vayatzmu, b'moed ma'od, that women were giving birth to 6 children at a time. Everyone's heard this medrash. There's a medrash that says not 600, not 6, but it was 600,000. How could someone give birth to 600,000 babies in one shot? So the Zohar Kodesh says it's referring to Yocheved, who had Moshe, whose neshama was made up of 600,000 neshamas. The Archaim HaKadosh says that's why Yocheved was Shifra. Shifra was the one that vatechayena sayeladim, because she was the mother of Moshe, which on some level obligated her to be the mother of every single Jew. Because really, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama is made up of the neshamas of every single Jew. Again, these are all miraculous inyanim. They're supposed to be. That's the Yesod of the Ran. Inyan of Moshe Rabbeinu was an inyan nisi, al pi nigla, al pi nister. What we're going to learn now is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, which, by the way, again, we all know the basic story, the Chumash Rashi, maybe even Ramban version of it, for sure. But now that we look at it with more mature eyes, it's rather very interesting and very fascinating, and that is the topic, Be'ezus Hashem, of this next year. So the pasuk begins, and really the story of Moshe Rabbeinu begins. Vayelech ish mi beis Levi, vayikach es bas Levi. So there was someone from the family of Levi that went, and what did he do when he went? He got married. Vayikach Kicha mistei Ephraim. And who did he marry? He married a girl from the family of Levi. Chazal say that this Ish mi beis Levi was Amram. And this Bas Levi was Yocheved. Chazal also say that Amram and Yocheved at this point had been previously married. The rest of the story, Rashi quotes it, it's based on the Gemara Masechtas Soita Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, is that when Pari made the Gzeira, and this is in the previous pasuk, Vayitzav Pari l'chol amay lemar, kol haben hayiloid hayoira tashlichu v'chol habas techayon. So Amram got up, and Amram said that if there's a Gzeira, that if we have a baby boy, hayoira tashlichu, it doesn't make any sense for us to have children. So he divorced his wife Yocheved. Amram was the Gadol Adar, and when Amram divorced his wife, all the people, they followed suit, and they did what the Gadol Adar did. So they divorced their wives, and every single Jew went and got divorced. And Miriam, who was a little girl at the time, who was Amram and Yocheved's daughter, went to her father and said, your gzeira is worse than the gzeira of Pari. Shepari lo gazer ela al ascharim, and you're being geyser on scharim and keves. Pari lo gazer ela al oilam hazeh, you're being geyser on oilam hazeh and oilam haba. Pari made a gzeira, but safik gzeirasa miskayemes, safik gzeirasa ena miskayemes. But if we don't have any children, for sure, this gzeira is going to be miskayemes. I think you're making a terrible, terrible mistake. And Chazal say, Amram listened to his daughter, think of the humility, and said, something, my Miriam? You are right. And he went ahead and he got married again. And Chazal say, that's the Vayelech Ishmi Beis Levi. Where did he go? Halach batzas bitay. He went, proverbially speaking, he followed the advice of his daughter. Vayikach es bas Levi, not for the first time, but rather Vayikach es bas Levi, he remarried her, and he said, something? Even though Pari made the gzeira, ichfafun the gzeira. We're going to stay married. Everybody did the same thing, and Klal Yisrael is going to continue to thrive as a result of Miriam's great advice that she gave to Amram. But either way, the pasuk says, Vataro Yisha vatelid bein. This bas Levi Yocheved became pregnant, and she had a son. Vatera oisaki toivu. She saw her son, and he was toiv. So she went and she hid him for 3 months. Rashi says, what does it mean ki toivu? Kishenoilad nismala habayas kulei oira. Toivu, when he was born, they realized that something was different. This is not an ordinary child, right? This is something very, very special. See the introduction to today's shir for further analysis on this point. If you take a look at the Ramban, he says such a beautiful lashon. He says, "Het Chazal know that ki toivu means nisbala habayis kulei. He says, Yodua, everybody knows, ki kol anoshim oyavois es b'neim. Every single mother loves her son. Yafin, v'she'ena yafin. Doesn't matter if the baby is cute, or maybe even if the baby is not so cute. And every single mother is going to hide their baby if there's a gzeira of some sort with every possible way that they can. And the Torah would not have to say that the reason Bas Levi went and hid her son is because, he was such a cute kid, and as a result, look at those cheeks, I better hide him, right? It's impossible, because every mother thinks that about her baby. Avo pirish hatoiv. What is the taich of this toiva? Sherasa boy toiv mechudesh. She saw something very, very different. V'chashva ki yera by nesvi natzal. There's something different about this child. Every child we have to say, but this is different. I think this child is special. I think big things are going to come from this child. This is the Indian of Nismala Abayas Kuleyira, and that's why, even though every mother was hiding their child, but there was a little extra oomph in this one, because they saw that this child, from the moment he was born, was destined to greatness. So how long did they hide him for? For 3 months. The pasuk but once 3 months passed, they couldn't hide him anymore. Rashi says, quoting a Gemara, it's based on the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was born to 6 months and a day. Now what happened was, the Egyptians had a cheshbon. They knew the time that the Ivrios were supposed to have children, and as a result, they would come after them and look for the child, meaning they were following the pregnancy, and as a result, they were looking for the child. Now, the assumption usually is a child is born to 9 months, but because Moshe was born a little bit prematurely, so they had this little buffer of 3 months to be able to hide Moshe. But once the 3 months passed, now already the Mitzrayim were going to come knocking, and as a result, at that point, it was impossible for them to hide Moshe anymore in the house. So they had to come up with a plan B. So Yocheved took a teva, took a little basket that was made of wicker, vatachmara, and she smeared it bachemer with clay, ubazofes, and with pitch, vatosim bas hayeled. She put her child into it, vatosim basof al svas hayar, and she placed this teva in the reeds right at the side of the yar. In the meantime, this little boy's sister, also known as Miriam, was standing meirachik, right, from the vatins, and she's watching. She wants to see how this is going to play itself out. In the interim, the daughter of Pari went to bathe by the Yar, and she went together with her Misharsa. She's the daughter of Pari, so obviously she has some sort of royal entourage. And as she's going down to bathe, so she sees this teva, it's inside the reeds. And she stretched out Amasa, and she went after this teva. What does Amasa mean? Everybody knows. Rashi says two pshat. One pshat Rashi says is she sent one of her naros. The pasuk says she's a bas malachim, she's bas paroi. She's not going to just go and schlep this teva by herself. So she asks one of her gaboim to go ahead, and one of her gabois to go ahead and do it for her. Rashi brings another pshat. Vatishaches amasa means that she stretched out her hand. And really was very far away. But a miracle happened and her hand stretched, and like this she was able to now get this teva. Vatiftach, she opens up the teva, vatireu asayelet, and she saw a child. Vihine nar boicha. And this child was crying. Rashi says the word nar usually is a connotation for someone that's a little bit older. Koiloi kenar. So even though he was a little child, but he actually had a mature sounding voice. And as soon as she saw this little baby, she was overwhelmed with compassion for him. And she said, this must be a Jewish child. The Ibn Ezra says, how did she know it was a Jewish child? Says Ibn Ezra, because she saw he was gemalet. So if he had a bris milah, the Ivriim were keeping bris milah. By the way, it's a shayla, were they or were they not? But he had a bris milah, and because he had a bris milah, that's how she knew he was miyaldei or Ivrim. The Ramban quotes Ibn Ezra. He says, "But the einay tzarich l'zeh." You don't have to come on to that. It's a nice pshat, but it's certainly not necessary. If you see a baby abandoned in a ya'ar during a time that there's a gzeira of kol ben hayiloid hayoira tashlichu, there's a pretty good chance that miyaldei ha'ivrim zeh. So just the narrative lends itself to her thinking that that's probably what's going on. In the meantime, Miriam, who was standing from afar, suddenly comes and she enters the scene. And she goes to Bas Paroi, as if she has no idea who this child is, and she says, I see you're holding this baby. The nar is boicha, right? The baby is crying, and she's trying to coo the baby and trying to pacify her, or him, a little bit. Says, would you like me to call a isha meinekes meno ivriyos? Maybe one of the ivriyos, one of the Jewish meinekeses, v'sein neklachas hayolet. So like this, that woman will be able to go and nurse the child. What's the rest of the story? So Rashi says that Bas Paroi and Narisel, they tried nursing the child. But Moshe Rabbeinu, me'oitzom kidushasai, would not eat from the cholov that came from this mitzvahs. So this girl just came, Miriam, and she said, something, I have a little bit of an idea. If you would like, I can call one of the Ivriyos. They're professionals at this. Maybe they'll be able to make it work. Either way, Bas Pari listened to the suggestion. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good idea. So Miriam went, and she called the mother of the Yoled. Now, unbeknownst that it's the mother of the Yoled, but she goes ahead and she calls Yocheved. So now Yocheved meets Bas Pari. Bas Pari is holding this little baby that she just found inside this Tevas Goima, which is inside the Suf al Srasayar. And again, she doesn't realize this, but she's talking to the baby's mother. So Bas Pari tells her, could you please take this baby, and could you nurse the baby for me? And I'll even pay you. Wow. So she took the child, and she nursed the child. Fast forward a little bit. Child got older. And now Yocheved had to return the child. So she returns the child to Bas Pari, because again, it's not officially Yocheved's child. Bas Pari found this child, and this child was very noisechein by Bas Pari. Vatachmo, right? She really had compassion towards him. And the deal was that you take the baby, nurse it, but when the baby gets a little bit older, you're going to bring it back to me. And that's exactly what happens in this pasuk. So the child gets older. Yocheved returns the child to Bas Pari, Vayhila lebein, and Bas Pari raised this child as if he was her own son. She even gave him a name. Vatikra Shmoi Moshe. She named him Moshe. Vatomer, she said that the reason I'm naming him Moshe is ki min hamayim mishisu, because I schlepped him out of the water, and that's what the word Moshe means. So Bas Paroi raises this child. She even names this child. She gives the name Moshe, a name that would stick, by the way. And the reason she gives the name Moshe is Ki min hamayim mishisu. We have a very long raid bite that we spoke about once upon a time. Ayin related raid bites, I guess. But it's based on an Even Ezra, on this pasuk right here. Even Ezra says that the word Moshe, which means to schlep out, is a word that's Lashon Kodesh. Bas Para, you would think, spoke Egyptian. She spoke Mitzris. She didn't speak Lashon HaKodesh. If that's the case, it's like a little hard to understand when the pasuk says Vatikra Shmoi Moshe, that Bas Paroi calls Moshe Ki min hamayim mishisu. Ki min hamayim mishisu. Vatikra Shmoi Moshe would make sense if her mamalushin was Lashon HaKodesh. But you're dealing with Bas Paroi. She for sure spoke Egyptian. And if that's the case, it doesn't make so much sense that from the shirish of the word mishisu, she would give Moshe the name of Moshe. Says Even Ezra, a davar pella. He says, Shem Moshe, the name Moshe miturgim, milosha mitzrayim beloshan HaKodesh. The name that Bas Pari gave Moshe was not Moshe, but rather she gave him a name that was Egyptian. A name that means ki min hamayim mishisu in Egyptian. When the Torah called him Moshe, what the Torah is doing is, the Torah is translating the Egyptian word into Lashon HaKodesh. What does that mean? We're tracing the etymology of the Egyptian name, Ki min hamayim mishisu, however you say that in Egyptian. The translation into Lashon HaKodesh is, Ki min hamayim mishisu. Oh, if it's mishisu, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to name Moshe. So who gave the name Moshe? We, the Torah gave the name Moshe. But the point is that it's based on the concept, the idea, the thought, the einfal of Bas Paroi, but the name that Bas Paroi gave was an Egyptian name. Moshe is just a translation of that Egyptian name. So it says Even Ezra, you're probably wondering, what was the name that Bas Paroi gave? It says, I'm going to tell you the name. Ushmoi beloshem mitzrayim haya munyos. That was the name. So really, Moshe Rabbeinu's name that he was given by Bas Paroi was Munyus. But it's not Munyas Rabbeinu, it's Moshe Rabbeinu. And the reason is because Moshe is the Lashon HaKodesh, the translation of the name Munyas. The Barbanel has a very, very long arichos on this Even Ezra. He's very not happy with this Even Ezra. Says, first of all, I never heard of a concept of translating a name. There's no such thing. Names are names are names. If this is your name, this is your name. Now, it could be someone from another country and another nationality is not going to know how to pronounce your name, right? It might be Hayim and not Chaim, I don't know. But it's going to be that name, right? It's always the name. So the name that was given was Munyas, but we translate the name into another language. Moshe, how does it make sense? Even Ezra's kasha that Bas Paroi would say Ki min hamayim mishisu. Says that Barbanel, I think Even Ezra made another mistake. Vatikra Shmoi Moshe is not referring to Bas Paroi, says the Barbanel. Vatikra Shmoi Moshe is going back on the Eim Hayeled. It's referring to Yecheved. Yecheved is the one that gave the name. We've all been making a terrible mistake, says the Barbanel. He says in Pshutei Shal Mikra, Vativiyeu leBas Paroi. Right? Who's the Vativiyeu leBas Paroi? Yecheved. Vatikra Shmoi Moshe is also referring to Yecheved. Either way, again, we have a half-hour raid bite on this from once upon a time. We're holding Shlishi and we're moving along. The pasuk is Vayi Bayom Mahim. It was around that time. Vayigdal Moshe. Moshe got older. Vayetze Alechov. He went out to his brothers. Vayarbes of Loisam. And he saw what was going on. He saw that they were being beaten. They were being tortured by the Egyptians. Vayar Ish Mitzri. And specifically, he saw an Egyptian man, Maka Ish Ivri Me'achav, who was hitting an Ish Ivri, who was one of his brothers. So we have to hit the pause button right away. Rashi asks, if you look at Pasuk Yud, it says, Vayigdal Hayeled, Vativiyeu leBas Paroi. If you look at Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayi Bayom Ma'im, Vayigdal Moshe, Vayetze Alechov, Vayigdal Shtei Pamim. Moshe Rabbeinu already became a Gadol in Pasuk Yud. Hasn't becoming a Gadol again in Pasuk Yud Aleph, right? He had two bar mitzvahs, Vayigdal in Pasuk Yud, and then Vayigdal again in Pasuk Yud Aleph. So Rashi says, so Rashi quotes the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi. The first time it says Vayigdal Hayeled, it means he got older. He just physically got older. When the pasuk says in Yud Aleph, Vayigdal Moshe, what it means is Ligdula Shemino Pari al Beisai, because he's growing up in the house of Pari, right? Whose son is he? Quote unquote. He's the son of Bas Pari. So he has a bed in the palace of Paroi. Paroi likes him, and we know Paroi al Beisai, this is shades of Yosef HaTzadik. But either way, that's what the second Vayigdal means. The Ramban brings Rashi, and the Ramban is chaylik. The Ramban says that you know what the two Vayigdals are in Pshutei Shal Mikra? He says the first Vayigdal means that Vayigdal Hayeled. He was a little boy, and the boy got older to the point where he didn't need to nurse anymore. Baby was able to eat solid food, right? Didn't need a nursing mother. Thus, Vayigdal Hayeled, Vativiyeh, the Baspari. The only reason this child was Bayocheved was because of the fact that Baspari said, Hey lichias Hayeled azeh veheini kuli. It was, her job was to be the meinekas. Well, if the baby is not nursing anymore, so Vayigdal Hayeled, Vativiyeh, the Baspari. The second Vayigdal is he just got a little bit older. No one says the Ramban, Mino, Pari al Beisai, that's Miloshin, Gedula, like Torah Gedula. No one says that's what it means. It means Vayigdal Moshe. He got old, he became a Bardas, the Ramban says, Vayetzei Alecha, Vayarbis of Loisam. There's another important Maramakim, also a Ramban, that we need to speak out. And that is, so the pasuk says, "Vayiba yom mahem, vayigdal Moshe." Moshe got older. According to the Ramban, he just got older, right? He has das now, bar mitzvah, something like that. According to Rashi, it's a lashon of gedula, shemino parei al beisai. So what does he do? Vayetzei al echav. He goes out to his brothers. Vayarbis of loisam. Vayar ish mitzri maki ish ivri me'echav. So he becomes a little bit older. What does he do? He goes out to his brothers. It feels like we're missing a piece of information. Raman says we are. What happened was, Vayetze al Echav, and at that point, his mother, Baspari, sat him down and says, I want to tell you a little bit, fin wann die stammst. I'm not really your mother. As a matter of fact, I found you once in a suf. As a matter of fact, I want you to know that you're miyaldei ha'ivrim. You're a Jewish child. You come from the Ivrim, those chevra that live in Goshen, those people that are being beaten up right now, right? Those people that are in some form of slave labor camp, albeit in a cunning way. But the bottom line is, you come from that. And he was very, very taken aback. Ki higidu loy asher hu Yehudi, the poetry of the Ramban. They let him know that he's a Yehudi. And as soon as he heard that, vayuchafetz l'roisam, he says, oh my gosh, these are my brothers, I want to see them. Bavur shehem echav, because they're her brothers. So immediately, as soon as he heard this, he says, I want to now see with my own eyes what my brethren are being subject to. V'hinei nistakel b'sivloisam. So he went out to see his brothers. He was just told that they're his brothers. And you know what he saw? Moshe could not handle what he was looking at. As a matter of fact, Vayar ish mitzri, maki ish ivri me'echav. He saw with his own eyes how some SS guy is beating a Jew. And he's pulling his beard or whatever he's doing. And he couldn't be soivel it. It was not something he was able to see. And immediately, Vayifen koi v'koi, he looked this way, he looked that way. Vayarki and ish, and he saw there was nobody watching him. Vayachas ha-mitzri, he took out this mitzri. Vayit mineo b'choil, and he quickly hit him in the sand. Now Chazal tells us a little bit more about who this mitzri is, something that we're Be'ez Hashem going to get to. But the pshutei shal mikra is that Moshe Rabbeinu sneezed that this mitzri is hitting an ish ivri me'echav. Couldn't handle it. The next day, he went out again. And this time, this time he saw two Ivrim that were fighting. Because I'll say it was not just two ordinary Ivrim, but these were the infamous Dasim and Avirim. And Moshe Rabbeinu turned to the Rasha, Lama Sakereyecha, why are you hitting your friend? So Dasim and Aviram, or one of them said, but since when are you in charge of us? Oh, you're suggesting that you want to kill us? The same way you killed that Egyptian yesterday? When Moshe heard what Dasim and Aviram said, he got very scared. He said, I looked both ways. I thought that I was able to do this in a subtle way, but I realize now that I was unsuccessful. I think I'm in a little bit of a trouble. Rashi says, what's this lashon? Vayomer mi samcha leish sar v'shoifet aleinu halohargeni ata oimer. Halohargeni ata oimer. Halohargeni ata. You're coming to kill me. What does ata oimer mean? So Rashi says, mikan anu lemeidim. From here we learn shaharge b'shem hamafarish, that the way Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Mitzri wasn't physically, even though the pasuk says Vayaches HaMitzri, but it wasn't a physical blow. He killed him with the Shem HaMefarish. The Ramban brings Rashi, and the Ramban asks on Rashi that if the way that Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Mitzri was with the Shem HaMefarish, how did Dasim and Aviram know? Meaning, if Vayaches HaMitzri means he punched him in the nose and he took him out like really, really good, or who knows what he did to him. Okay, they saw it. So, but if all he did was say something, so what? Moshe Rabbeinu said something, all of a sudden this guy drops dead in some miraculous way. How were they able to connect the two things? So the Ramban says, Ulai, maybe, Samach Yodoi Olav, maybe when Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Mitzri, what he did first was he put his hand on top of the Mitzri. What is this reminiscent of? The Sephorna that we spoke at in the beginning of Parshas Vayechi. The Sephorna says that when Yosef brought Menashe and Ephraim for a bracha, so it says that the Einei Yisrael's Kavdu mizoikin la yuchal lirois. It was very hard for him to see. So he told Yosef, bring Ephraim and Menashe to me. Yichabik lohem, vayishak lohem. Right, he hugged them and he kissed them. Says the Sforna, in order for a bracha to be chal, there has to be some physical connection between the one giving the bracha and the one receiving the bracha. That physical connection you can have through sight. But being that Yisrael was already old, lo yuchal lirois, so he couldn't see them properly. So therefore he needed touch. And that was the vayichabik, that was the vayishak. If it's true for brachas, it makes sense. It would be true for klalos as well, right? They come from the same inyan. Ulai samach yodai olav vayikaleu b'shem Hashem. That's a furna, could be the hezber in this Ramban. But either way, Moshe Rabbeinu realizes now, ochein noida hadavar, those infamous words. Vayishma paroi es hadavar hazeh. As a matter of fact, Dasim Avinu went and they ratted out Moshe to Paroi. And Paroi heard what happened. Vayivakish larigas Moshe, and he wanted to kill Moshe. Now, if you take a step back, it's interesting, right? Because Moshe Rabbeinu is a ben bias in the house of Paroi. I mean, if nothing else, he's like a son to Basya, who's the daughter of Paroi. Rashi says that the second Vayigdal was L'Gdula, Shemino Paroi al Beisai. So he's not just some ordinary person that just committed homicide, right? He's someone that has a little bit of protectia. But at the same time, Paroi immediately decided that Moshe needs to be killed. Ad kidei kach vayivrach Moshe mipnei Paroi. Moshe Rabbeinu was forced to be a fugitive, and he ran away from Paroi. And where did he go? Vayeshev eretz Midyan. He settled in the land of Midyan. Vayeshev ala be'er, and he parked himself next to a well. Why did he go to a well? So Rashi says because he had a Messiah already. Yaakov Avinu found his zivug by a well. Eliezer and Avram. Rashi doesn't say this. When he came to town, so where did he go? He went straight to the well, of course, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu does the same thing. He goes to the well. Okay, now we have to take a step backwards. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. Vatavoina, and they would go. Vatidlena, and they would take out water. Vatmalenos harahatim, they would fill their troughs lahashkes sainaviem to water and to give to drink the sheep of their father. And this is something that they would do every single day. On this particular day, Vayovayu Haroyim, there were male shepherds that came, Vayogarshum, and they sent them away. And all of a sudden, they're being bullied by these men. Vayoka Moshe got up. Vayoshion, he's Moshion Shal Yisrael. Over here, he was Moshion of the Benois Koyin Midyan, Vayashkes Tzoinam, and he took care of their sheep. Vatavoina el Ru'uel Avim. So they came home to their father Ru'uel. Vayomer, and Ru'uel said, Ma'adu mihartim b'hayoim. Why'd you get here so early today? Vatoimarna, and they said, Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man, referring to Moshe, Hitzilonu miyad haroyim, saved us from the shepherds. V'gam doloi dololonu vayashkes atzoin. And he got us the water, and he took care of our tzoin, and that's why we're able to come here a little bit early. If you take a look at the Ramban depicts a little bit the rest of the story. The Ramban says that what would happen is that whenever these Benois Koyim Midyan would come to the well, so if the men were there, the men would always come first, right? They were stronger, they were bigger, and they would intimidate them, and as a result, they were always able to come first. On this particular day, they decided they're going to get there a little bit early. And the reason they're going to get there a little bit early is that if they get there before the men come like this, they'll be able to get their thing. And they're doing their thing, and all of a sudden, these male shepherds come, and they say, why do you come before us? He says, but you aren't even here. And this whole fight breaks out. Moshe Rabbeinu sees the fight breaking out. Moshe Rabbeinu is able to save them, and they end up coming home way earlier than Usual. Punk today, they decided to come a little bit early, and this little struggle happened, and Moshe Rabbeinu saved them. But the bottom line is, today they're home a lot earlier than they usually are, and their father, Reuel, wants to know what's going on over here. And they said there was an Ish Mitzri Hitzilanu. So Reuel told his daughters, where is this person? Why do you let him go? You should have called him in. Right? Let him break bread. So Moshe came and he agreed. Rashi says Vayol is also a lashon of shvuah. He swore that he was going to stay with them. But the bottom line is, he came, and Reuel went, and he took his daughter Tzipora. It sounds like mamish, just one thing led to another. The Velt says when you have 7 daughters, you don't let a good guy slip through your fingers, right? So there was an opportunity now. Boom. Next thing you know, there's a l'chaim. Vayitin es Tzipora bita l'Moshe. Vatelet bein vayikra shmoi Gershon ki amar ger hoyisi beretz nachriya. I was a stranger in a strange land. I'm living in the land of Midian. The Ramban says that based on the simple reading of these psukim, it would seem that Moshe Rabbeinu was a fugitive. Vayivrach Moshe mipnei Parei. And where did he run to? He made a beeline to Midian. Vayeshev be'eretz Midian. Vayeshev ala be'er. He goes straight to there. Rashi says he learned from Yaakov. And over there he meets the daughters of Reuel, daughters of Yisrael. And in a very short period of time, he marries Tzipora, who's one of the 7 daughters of Yisrael. Vatelet ben vayikra shmoi Gershon. Right? So right after he ran away, he's in Midian. The next thing you know, he's married. A year later, he already has a son whose name is Gershon. Says the Ramban, that's not really what happened. And the Ramban says, I'm going to tell you why logically it can't be what happened. Because Midian geographically is very, very close to Egypt. And if Moshe Rabbeinu felt that his life was at risk, and it's for that reason he had to run away, you're not going to run to the neighboring city. It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to run really far. You're probably going to go Me'ever Hanar, right? You're crossing the Euphrates River. I don't know, you're going somewhere else. But to go to Midian would make 0 sense, says the Ramban. So the Ramban says, I believe that these 2 stories of Vayivrach Moshe and Vayeshe Be'eretz Midian, even though they're Toich Kedei Dibur in the Torah, they're mentioned the same pasuk, they happened years and years and years and years apart. As a matter of fact, you ready for this? You know how many years apart, says the Ramban, they happened? In my best guess, approximately 60 years. And he says, I'll tell you why. Because how old was Moshe Rabbeinu when he ran away? So the Ramban says, I'm not sure. Maybe he was 12. He says, for sure not older than 20, right? He's a teenager, right? That's basically what he is. He's a teenager. When Moshe Rabbeinu was going to return back to Mitzrayim to be Moshe and Yisrael, how old is he going to be? He's going to be 80 years old. That means that from the time that Moshe Rabbeinu runs away until he comes back is Be'erich 60 years. Now this story right here of Moshe Rabbeinu having the son Gershom and Moshe Rabbeinu marrying the daughter of Yisrael is going to immediately segue in the next year to HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealing himself to Moshe at the Sneh and telling him that I want you to be the shliach, I want you to be the one that's going to take the Yidden Adam. It's right. So for sure the story of Tzipora, for sure the story of Vayesh Be'eretz Midian happened when Moshe Rabbeinu was 80. But when he ran away, he's a teenager. So says Ramban, it's just back to the envelope arithmetic. This is not even complicated. It's very, very simple. It's elementary. For sure, decades passed. In my mind, says the Ramban, it's approximately 60 years must have endured from the words Vayivrach Moshe mipnei Paroi to the next words in the Torah, which are Vayeshev be'eretz Midian. So here's the question. Where was Moshe for those 60 years? It's a very, very long time. Where was he? 60 years are missing from the greatest Jew to ever live. I mean, we spoke about Moshe in the introduction. Moshe is a Nes, he's a Pella. He's V'loikam Navi Oib Yisrael Kim Moshe. We're missing 60 years of his life. I mean, we're going to know the next 40 years of his life, Shanemo. We know the beginning of his life. We just read the Psukim. But there's 60 years, a very long time, missing from the narrative. Right? What happened to Moshe? Where was he during those 60 years? Now, it's very, very interesting. There's a Yalkut Shemoini in the beginning of Parshas Shemos that fills in the gap, that talks about it. It's a long Yalkut Shemoini, And it tells this incredible, fantastic tale of the missing 60 years of Moshe Rabbeinu. There are snippets of this Yalkut Shemoni that are quoted by Rishonim in Etliche Pletzer. But I think the source that tells the story in the most detailed and the easiest way to read way is in the Sefer HaYashar. Now, the Sefer HaYashar requires a rabbi of its own. There's a lot of history behind the Sefer HaYashar. Now, this is not to be confused with the Sefer HaYashar that was written by Rabbeinu Tam. It's not to be confused by the Musar Sefer called Sefer HaYashar. This is a medrash, quote unquote, called Sefer HaYashar. It's interesting. It was first discovered in the 16th century, 17th century, but it traces itself b'Mesorah already to the times of the Churban. So this is an old collection of midrashim which fills in not only the gaps of these 60 years of Moshe Rabbeinu, but a lot of the stories, a lot of the Parshas and the Torah that you go through, specifically the life and times of the Shvatim. There's a lot of different gaps, #rest of the story, that emerges from Sefer HaYashar. Fascinating work. Most of it, again, I didn't go through it, but from my understanding, most of it is rooted in Midrashim and really has Mekoros in more traditional sources. But as it relates to the 60 years of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Sefer HaYashar has 30 pages on it. And again, it's Shurasha in a Yalkut Shemoni right here in the beginning of Sefer Shemos, and there's a lot of parts of this that are quoted by different Rishonim. It's clear that the Rishonim were Mekabel, this Messiah that's mentioned in the Sefer HaYashar. So I think it's kedai to read a few paragraphs from the Sefer HaYashar, but just to set the stage, and that is, at this time that Moshe Rabbeinu ran away. This is when Moshe Rabbeinu was a teenager. So when Moshe Rabbeinu runs away, there was a war that was taking place between the land of Cush, which is Ethiopia, and the land of Aram and the Bnei Kedem. So Aram, I guess that's where Lavan came from. So the other side, the Ever Hanar, is fighting with the king of Cush. And it's around that time that Moshe Rabbeinu runs away. Now the Sefer HaYashar goes on to say that the king of Cush went out to fight this battle. And when he went out, one of his residents, a man you might have heard of, his name was Bilam, and his two sons decided that they're going to overthrow the kingdom of this Melech Cush. So the king of Cush is out fighting a battle. He's there with his whole cabinet and all his strong guys, right? All the tough guys are out at war right now. So he goes after the weaklings, and Bilam basically takes over the city. And he's able to use his kishif in a way where by the time the king of Cush came back, the king of Cush had no ability. He had no ability to get back into his own country. So right now, the country, Cush, is somewhat fortified, and it's being controlled by you. It's being controlled by none other than Bilam, one of the great nemesis of Klal Yisrael, and his two sons. It's at that time that Moshe Rabbeinu enters the picture. Pasuk. The Medrash says, it was at that time, when this war and this siege was taking place on the land of Cush, Moshe Rabbeinu ran away from Mitzrayim, from Pare, because Pare had wanted to kill him, because he killed the Mitzri. So the Medrash gives us an exact date. Moshe Rabbeinu was 18 years old at the time. And he went and he fled to the camp of Kiknos. Kiknos was the name of that king of Cush, who were trying to get back into their own country. This siege, so to speak, with the king of Cush trying to get back into his own house, lasted 9 years, and Moshe Rabbeinu was with them for that entire 9-year period. Whatever they were doing, Moshe was one of the chevra. But Moshe was someone that was the favorite. He was very, very popular amongst the troops. Because he was very special. And he had the koima, the stature of a lion. Adir, he was very big. Upanov kishemesh, pnei Moshe k'pnei achama. His face was like that of the sun. V'koyach k'vurosei ka'aryeh chazak. right? Vayachas HaMitzri. He was also very, very strong. Vayihi yoyetz lamelech. He was certainly quite intelligent, and he was a consultant to the king. Vayihi miketz teisha shanim. As at the end of the 9 years, Vayechla Kiknos as choyoy asher yamos by. Kiknos, the king of Cush, became very sick. The sickness which ultimately would take his life. Vayechzak choyoy olav. It got very bad. Vayomas b'yem hashvi. Lasted 7 days, and then he died. Vayachnetu oisay avodav. Right? They embalmed him, mummified him. They buried him outside of Mitzrayim. They made him an oil. Etc., etc. It was after the death of Kiknos, the king of Cush. Things were getting very, very bad in terms of the war and everything that was going on. So the Olam started talking amongst themselves. It's already 9 years that have passed. This has been going on for a very, very long time. We need to come up with an idea. So they said, you're right. But the first thing we need is we need a leader. Our leader just died. So we have to replace him. So there's a whole back and forth. I'm skipping around. They decided that we think the person that's fit to be the next king of Cush is none other than Moshe, and he took over Tachas Kiknus Melech Cush. He is now the replacement. And if you want to know when this happened relative to the reign of Paroi, it was the 55th year of his reign. 157 years from the Redu, from when the time Yaakov Avinu had come to Mitzrayim. At that point, Malach Moshe al Cush. How old was he? So it's back of the envelope arithmetic. He was 18 years old when he showed up. He was engaged in this siege for 9 years. So Ben Esrim v'Sheva Shanim Moshe b'Molchei al Cush v'Arbaim Shanim Malach, and he was king for 40 years. Vayiten Hashem es Moshe l'chein u'lechesed be'enei kol b'nei Cush v'Yavo b'nei Cush oisay ma'od. Everybody loved him. Vayhi Moshe toiv im Hashem v'Manosh. He was very religious, very faithful, but he was also good together with the people. Either way, the Medrash goes on to talk about how Moshe Rabbeinu came up with an idea of how to be able to get into the city. His idea worked, and Moshe Rabbeinu now was immediately incredibly successful. He was able to do what Kiknos couldn't do in 9 years, and suddenly he's able to take hold of the city again. Moshe was able to conquer the city using his chachma. Now he had the palace, so now he's not only king, he was already king outside, but what kind of stellar was that? Now he has a palace. They put a crown on his head. And they gave him a wife. And the wife that they gave him was Adoniya Hamalka, the queen Adoniya, who was the wife of Kiknos. So, you're the new king, you marry the old king's wife. Vayira Moshe as Hashem Elikei Avosav. But Moshe Rabbeinu had incredible fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'loi ba eleha. V'loi pana eleha as Einav. He wouldn't even look at her. Ki zocha Moshe es asher shpia Avram es Eliezer Abdileim. Because Moshe Rabbeinu remembered the shvuah that his great-great-grandfather Avram had made Eliezer swore, and that was lo sikach lebni liyitzchak isha mibnois Canaan. V'gam esnei asa Yitzchak b'vrayich Yaakov b'nei Ach. And Yitzchak had commanded his son Yaakov the same thing when he was running away from Esav. At sher tzivo lemer lo sikach isha mibnois Canaan. V'lo tischatim b'chol b'nei Cham. Ki Hashem Elokeinu nasa nescham ben Noach v'ezbon v'ez kol zarim la'avodim. L'bni, l'shem, l'bnei yefes, u'l'zar machreim adoylom. Al kein lo hifna Moshe es libay v'es einav al isha kiknos kol yemei malchay al kush. Moshe Rabbeinu was king for 40 years, but he never paid any attention. Lo yiba'ileh, even lo hifna eleh es einav. Vayira Moshe mipnei Hashem alikov kol yamav. Moshe Rabbeinu feared HaKadosh Baruch Hu all his days. Vayisalich Moshe l'fnei Hashem be'emes. B'chol levavai u'v'chol nafshay. Lo yisar Moshe min haderech ha'toiva kol yemei chayav. Lo yinotem min haderech asher holchu ba'Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov yomen u'smot. Vayischazik Moshe b'malchus b'nei Cush. Vayinagas b'nei Cush b'mishpat kichach masai. Vayatzliach Moshe b'malchusai. I'm skipping. U'Moshe ben Amram oidenu melech be'eretz Cush b'yomim mahem. Moshe ben Amram, 40 years. He's still the king of Cush during those days. He was Very, very successful. Vayinagas kol malchus b'nei kush b'mishpa b'tzedek u'b'tam. Vayavo kol b'nei kush as Moshe kol yimei moche aleim. Vayiru kol yoishvei eretz kush milfon of Yira Gedol. Vayi b'shnasu arbam l'mloich Moshe al kush. It was 40 years from Moshe Rabbeinu had been king. Moshe yoish val kisei hamalucha. V'adoiniyah hamalka l'fon v'chal asarim yoish and sivay. Moshe is there with the queen. Everybody's around him. And all of a sudden, v'atoimer adoiniyah hamalka l'fnei hamelech v'asarim. Adoiniyah, who's the queen, who's been living with Moshe, sort of being ignored for 40 years, she couldn't anymore. So she turns to the Sarim and she says, Ma davar azeh, asher asisan kol bnei kush zeh yomim rabbim. Halo yadatem, do you know, ki arba'im shana, asher malach zeh al kush, elai loy karav? Do you realize that? Veselihei bnei kush lo yavad? You know, he doesn't worship the avodah zarah of kush. Va'ate shimun bnei kush. Listen to me. If you're asking me my opinion, think you take a foreigner and you bring him in to be king over your land, I don't care how smart he is, I don't care how big and strong he is, he's the wrong person. I think what you should do is, I think you should take my son from Kiknus, from her previous husband, V'hu yimlech aleim, he should be the next king. Because this is someone who's going to follow the culture of Kush. He's someone that's going to worship the avodah zarah of Kush. I think he's the one that's appropriate. Either way, the Medrash says they heard what she had to say, and they agreed. And they went to Moshe and they told Moshe, we'd like to respectfully ask you to resign. Now the Medrash goes on to say that even though they asked him to leave, but they asked him to leave in a bakavadig way. They didn't throw him out. He wasn't a fugitive, but at the same time, they asked him to leave. We're getting closer to the end. So Moshe Rabbeinu just spent how many years? 49 years. Right? He was 18 years old. He spent 9 years outside Kush, and then 40 years as the king of Kush. He just spent a yovel, a half a century in Ethiopia. This is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Isn't this amazing? But either way, so Moshe Rabbeinu had just spent all this time. How old is he now? So the Medrash is going to do the math for us. Moshe ben Sheva Shana v'Shishim Shana. He's already 67 years old. He was 18 when it started. He's 67 years old now. Kush, when he left Kush, because really everything that happened was being orchestrated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because it was getting closer to the end. It was getting closer to the time where Moshe Rabbeinu was going to be the Melech, not of Kush, but the Melech of Am Yisrael, where he was going to be able to now go ahead and fulfill his shlichus. But either way, he has to go now and he has to leave. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes, and you know where he goes? Vayeshev be'eretz Midyan. He goes to the land of Midyan. Vayeshev ala be'er, and he settles by the be'er. And when he's sitting by the be'er, u'lokoyim Midyan sheva banois, vatavoyna, vatidlena, vatmalena sarahatan lahashkis sein aviyim, vayavoyoroi, vayagarshum, and they come home early, and he says, what are you doing here? Vataymarni ish mitzri etzilonu miyad arayim. So Reuel Yisro says, oh, I want to meet this guy. See, he comes and they break bread. But how do we have it in the psukim? The next thing that Yisro says is, oh wow, you're a handsome guy, I have 7 daughters. No. Says the Medrash, that's not what happened. As a matter of fact, we're missing 10 years of narrative. You know what really happened? Moshe Rabbeinu shows up and he meets Reuel and he says, so tell me, who are you? So he says, me? I was just the king of Kush for 40 years. He says, so what are you doing here? I was kindly asked to leave. You were kindly asked to leave? That's not the way. You ever read Josephus? It's not the way it usually works. What do you mean you were kindly asked? No, I'm telling you. I was fine. They sent me out in a very, very nice way. I had a good run, but whatever. You know, it's a ganze meis. You don't have to know all the details. Reuel was too smart. He was very, very suspicious. Something is not adding up over here. He said, I have a feeling this person is a political fugitive right now. There's no way he was kindly asked to leave. And I have no doubt they tried killing this person. It has to be. So he said, I'm going to score some major political points right now. He tells Moshe, come with me to the basement. He starts walking down to the basement, right? It's a little cold, it's a little dark. Watch his step. The next thing he knows, he locks him up and he incarcerates him. And Reuel goes running back to Kush and he says, you're not going to believe it. That king of yours, I got him. I nailed him. The bottom line is, we're missing some gaps here, but Reuel, Yisro, kept Moshe in that cell for 10 years. He just left him there. Now, says the Medrash, Tzipora had seen Moshe. And Tzipora liked Moshe. So Tzipora every single day would go and she would sneak, literally behind her father's back. And she would go, she would give him something to eat. She would give him something to drink. She would nurture him. She would take care of him, unbeknownst to her father. At the end of 10 years, they're sitting around, at the dinner table, Israel and his daughters, I guess a couple of Adams maybe, and they're all around. He says, I wonder whatever happened with that guy that's, he's living in the basement. I haven't heard from him in a long time. He says, why don't we go find out? He said, he must be dead. He must have died, 9.5 years ago. I mean, there's no way he's alive. No one's fed him. He says, let's go. Let's see. So they go downstairs and they take a look, and Moshe Rabbeinu is Gibar Kari. Pnei Moshe is K'pnei Achama. And you can imagine the avoid of Moshe during those years. And they see Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu is as strong as he's ever been. And when Reuel saw that, he was very, very taken aback. He says, oh boy, this is an Israeli Kim, right? This is a scary, scary man. So he immediately takes Moshe out, invites him upstairs, then, Medrash tells a whole other story, allows him to marry Tzipporah. I mean, this is someone I want as an Edom. He was able to survive 10 years without any food. Moshe Rabbeinu becomes the Edom of Yisrael. He becomes his shepherd. And that really segues into the next part of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to reveal himself to him at the Sneh, and he's going to become Moshiach Shel Yisrael. Either way, as they say, and now you know the rest of the story. That is the story of Moshe. This nest, this pillow, which the Torah tells us in such a short, curt language. But this medrash, there's a Messiah on. There's a real Messiah on this medrash. By the way, just to end with something so fascinating, and that is that, we always talk about the Rashbam's Pirush al Torah of Pshutei Shal Mikra. The pasuk says in Parshas Ba'aloischa that Miriam spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe. What was the Lashon Hara? Ki isha kushes lakach. Miriam tells Aharon, our brother Moshe, he married a Isha Kushas, and everybody struggles to understand, what does he mean he married a Isha Kushas? Rashi says that he married someone that was as beautiful as a Kushas is Kushi, right? That's what Rashi says in Chumash. What does it mean, Ki Isha Kushas Lakach? Says the Rashbam, because we have a Messiah that Moshe Rabbeinu was a king in Kush. And she told Aharon, I never knew this. I didn't realize Moshe Rabbeinu was married to this Ethiopian woman, to one of the Bnei Cham. You have what's going on over here? Ki isha kushas lakach. That was the Lashon Hara. I just heard 40 years. Now the Rashbam says, V'hila yada. She didn't know the rest of the story. Shahulay ba'aleh. V'lay hifnei ne'eleh. It's something that she didn't know. But that was the Lashon Hara. The Ki isha kushas lakach of Parshas Ba'aloischa is dafka this story. But either way, this is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. Just to end with one last point, and that is, when I was a little boy, I used to go very often Friday night, together with my Zayda, Rabbi Yitzchak Mir. Zechreinu L'Vrachas. He used to take me to a Chumash share by one of the local Rabbanim, Rabbi Abba Brandspiegel. Zechreinu L'Vrachas. He had a shul on 19th Avenue, 47th Street, and some of my fondest childhood memories is on 10 degree below zero, freezing Friday nights, going with my Zayda to Rabbi Brandspiegel. I see Avrumi is laughing, Rumi Shon, and Avrumi Grossman. Both have Rumis. To hear his Chumash. I remember it was Parshas Shemos, and he said, Vayelech ish mi beis Levi, vayikach es bas Levi. Who's the ish mi beis Levi? It was Amram. And who was the bas Levi? It was Yocheved. So he says, well, why didn't the pasuk just say, Vayelech Amram, vayikach es Yocheved, vayelech ish mi beis Levi, vayikach es bas Levi. He said the Torah is coming to tell us that to have a Moshe Rabbeinu, you don't necessarily have to be an Amram and a Yocheved, but you could be a regular person, mi beis Levi, who takes a regular person that's a bas Levi. But if you set up your house and you raise your child in the richtige way, you could be zoicha to have a son that's going to be Moshiach Shel Yisrael. You could be zoicha to have a son that's a Moshe Rabbeinu. Had the pasuk said vayelech Amram vayikach es Yocheved, well then having a child that's going to make such a difference in this world would be above our pay grade. But the Torah says Vayelech ish mi beis Levi. Aposhta mensch. Vayikach es bas Levi. It was a nice shidduch. There's a chasana tonight. A beautiful, beautiful shidduch. And from this shidduch, an ish mi beis Levi, together with a bas Levi, is Arois Kekum and a Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, this is just a little bit of the story of Moshe. Be'ezer Hashem, in the next year, the Shibud and the story of Moshe are going to converge. And that we'll get to Be'ezer Hashem tomorrow.